And welcome back. This episode, we've got a very special guest writer stepping in for this one, Mr. Dorian Bandman, a fan of the show, and edited by myself. I'd been meaning to make an episode about the Scorpions' somewhat overlooked early influence on metal, and when I discovered Dorian's nearly encyclopedic knowledge on the band's history, I knew we had to collaborate. Alrighty, so let's get on with this. The Scorpions were first formed in 1965 in Hanover, Germany, whose original lineup included the longest-serving member of the band, guitarist Rudolf Schenker. It wasn't until about 1970 that the band added the guitar talents of the younger Schenker brother, Michael, who brought along Klaus Meine, who would serve as the band's frontman throughout its lifespan. From that point on, much of the songwriting would be done between Rudolf and Klaus, and the band quickly recorded their first album, Lonesome Crow, in 1972. The band chose to write lyrics in English, knowing this would increase their chances of being noticed internationally, and the album had the sound of many popular rock bands at the time, like Hendrix and Zeppelin. The style of the band's earliest albums would be quite different from their signature sound in the 80s, but it took several years for them to find their own unique sound. Lonesome Crow ended up generating a minor radio hit, It All Depends, but it would evaporate from the charts quickly, casting doubt on the future of the band. In 1973, the band would lose most of its members, including Michael Schenker, who left the band mid-tour for the British rock band UFO. He was replaced on lead guitar by Ulrich Roth, or better known as Uli John Roth. It was at this point that Klaus and Rudolf would merge with Uli's band, Dawn Road, and bring on Francis Buchholz as the band's bassist, but opting to keep the name The Scorpions, since that name was better known. Uli's unique guitar style and psychedelic-influenced sound would be a staple of the band throughout the 70s. The next 4 consecutive records saw the releases of 4 of some of the most revered albums in metal's early history. 1974's Fly to the Rainbow, 1975's In Trance, which would mark the beginning of a long relationship with producer Dieter Dierks. Then came 1976's Virgin Killer and 1977's Taken by Force, which saw the debut of longtime drummer Herman Rarebell. While Fly to the Rainbow was more of a transitional record, In Trance and Taken by Force would feature heavier guitar riffs and double guitar harmonies that saw the band branch out internationally beyond the borders of West Germany, particularly in Japan. Their style would go on to influence other famous bands from that era, including Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Queensryche. By 1978, the Scorpions were slowly beginning to gain international and commercial success, but Uli John Roth became upset with the band's direction and quit following their Japanese tour for their live album, Tokyo Tapes, and went on to form his own band, Electric Sun. Following the departure of Uli, and with an ever-growing fan base, the Scorpions had some large shoes to fill. The Scorpions went through an arduous process of auditioning new guitarists and ended up going through roughly 140 applicants before they discovered the fellow Hanover-born Matthias Jabs, who would remain with the band from that point on. Afterwards, the Scorpions would record the critically acclaimed album Love Drive, which included 3 guitarists for this recording: Matthias Jabs, Rudolf Schenker, and Michael Schenker following his departure from UFO. Michael Schenker would only be present for the recording of 3 songs on the album, including the title track. The album cover for Love Drive's original release was the subject of great controversy, as it was named Playboy magazine's top album sleeve of 1979. But as with Virgin Killer and Taken by Force, Love Drive's album cover was met with a different reaction by North American retailers. In response to this, Mercury Records printed the album for North American sales, featuring a more generic band-themed design. However, following the release of Love Drive and a brief stint on the subsequent tour, Michael Schenker left again, this time to form the Michael Schenker Group, and eventually a joint project with Robin McAuley. The Scorpions, however, continued with further successes throughout the 80s, which resulted in many of the band's most recognized radio hits. 1980's Animal Magnetism would result in the Scorpions' second major style shift, this time going for a more Americanized or glam metal sound. This allowed the Scorpions to compete with the other top metal acts of the era and gave them a North American breakthrough with hits such as Make It Real and the more widely known The Zoo, despite its lack of immediate success on the charts. The Zoo would feature a talkbox guitar solo by Matthias Jabs like the one used on Peter Frampton's Comes Alive. The cover was designed by Storm Thorgerson, who also designed Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, and the album's title track would be covered by Queensryche, who were still known as The Mob at the time. In spite of their newfound worldwide success, the band would be dealt yet another setback. In 1981, Klaus Maine's voice began to fail from throat problems. Klaus would undergo vocal cord surgery, and there was much uncertainty surrounding his future in the band. The band's next album, Blackout, would have Don Dokken performing backing vocals while Klaus's vocals recovered. After 2 major surgeries and vocal therapy, Klaus returned in 1982 with an improved vocal range to finish off the album. Blackout would become the Scorpions' best-known and best-selling album to date and produced 3 major singles, notably No One Like You, which set the standard for the Scorpions' sound for the remainder of the decade. Klaus had triumphantly returned with what critics and fans jokingly referred to as metal vocal cords. Bands that would enjoy similar international success, such as Metallica and Iron Maiden, would open for the Scorpions during this period. The Scorpions' reputation as metal musicians would be set in stone 2 years later with the release of Love at First Sting. This album spawned the mega-hit hard rock anthem Rock You Like a Hurricane and the power ballad Still Loving You. The successes of Blackout and Love at First Sting spawned the tour that resulted in the band's second live album, Worldwide Live, in 1985. For the next couple of years, the Scorpions circled the globe several times to tour behind these top-charting albums and wouldn't return to the studio until 1988 with Savage Amusement. While the album had a very polished sound and featured Canadian female metal singer Lee Aaron for the single Rhythm of Love, it was widely panned by critics and fans alike for cloning Def Leppard's sound on Hysteria and moving away from their signature heavy metal sound. The album did result, however, in the Scorpions becoming the second rock band to perform live in Russia, following Uriah Heep the year earlier, and generated them a massive following on the Soviet side of the Iron Curtain. Despite some of the successes, the Scorpions wanted to distance themselves from the sound of Savage Amusement and would replace their longtime producer Dieter Dierks for their 1990 album, Crazy World. Crazy World would feature the famous ballad Wind of Change, which served as an anthem for the fall of the Berlin Wall and Eastern European communism the year before. The band enjoyed a bounce back into success with the album, but following the tour, longtime bassist Francis Buchholz left in 1992 over disagreements with the band's management, and Ralph Rickerman would take over on bass for the rest of the decade. But for the remainder of the 90s, the Scorpions would enjoy only moderate critical success with their next couple of albums. The 1990s would be the most difficult time for the Scorpions commercially, critically, and internally, with many changes in their lineup. Grunge had taken over metal in the rock world, and like many 80s metal bands, the Scorpions struggled to attract the large audiences they had grown used to. In 1993, the Scorpions recorded Face the Heat, which would highlight the maturing sound of the band and even generate some radio play with hits like Alien Nation, but would not come close to the commercial successes of its predecessor. Leading up to their 1996 album Pure Instinct, drummer Herman Rarebell would leave the band to co-create his own record label, Monaco Records. Without an immediate permanent replacement for Rarebell, Pure Instinct was recorded with session musician Kurt Kress on drums. Pure Instinct was an attempt at placating the fan criticism of Face the Heat and featured many ballads, namely You and I, but ultimately did not deliver what had been missing since the early 80s. They eventually found James Kodak, who had previously played in the Macaulay Schenker Group with Michael Schenker and on Warrant's 1995 album Ultraphobic. The famous Kodak Attack drum solo has been a staple of their live performance ever since. However, even with this newfound stability in the Scorpions lineup, the fans would once again be disappointed and even confused with 1999's Eye to Eye. Eye to Eye was arguably the black sheep in their catalog, but despite its lack of commercial success, it was a first of many things by the Scorpions and has since developed a renewed appreciation among a minority of fans. Even I found I had judged it a tad unfairly for years until I listened to it again for the sake of this episode. While it certainly sounds like a completely different band, only with Klaus singing, there are a few pretty good songs to be found within. Eye to Eye was an experiment by the band to incorporate elements of the growing popularity of techno and electronic rock music of the late 90s with their own twist, as well as elements of R&B and funk. At the very least, you could say that this album is not anywhere near as bad as Lulu. It was also the first album to feature songs written in German by the Scorpions, Du bist so smutig, and I apologize for my German in advance. At this point, fans began to give up hope for a classic-sounding Scorpions album and yearned for the days of Blackout and Virgin Killer. Their prayers, however, would soon be answered. Following 2000's Moment of Glory concert with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra for the Expo in the Scorpions' hometown of Hanover and subsequent tour, the Scorpions released Acoustica in 2001. As you might guess by its name, Acoustica was an album of acoustic songs of fan favorites, but this was just a tease for the true return to form that fans had been yearning for over a decade, 2004's Unbreakable. With the addition of jazz fusion bassist Powell Makiwoda, Unbreakable was hailed as a return to the classic sound while still retaining the band's matured musical tastes, which grew out of Crazy World. The warmer reception of this album would allow for further success in 2007 with the release of the concept album Humanity Hour 1 with Desmond Child as a producer, who had previously co-written songs for Alice Cooper, Kiss, and countless other artists. Humanity enjoyed further positive reception growing out of Unbreakable, and the track Hour 1 was used by the Minnesota Wild as their intro music for the 2008 NHL season. At this point, the Scorpions had been active in the music business for over 35 years and began to look for a way to wind down their varied and storied career. In 2009, the band announced they would record one more album, tour the world one last time, and gracefully step aside while they still had the necessary chops and stamina to tour. In early 2010, they released Sting in the Tail, which again incorporated the classic songwriting and complementary guitar riffs and power ballads that brought the band their greatest successes while still retaining a modern edge. The entire album seemed to be a celebration and retrospective of the band's career, with song titles like The Best Is Yet to Come being vaguely reminiscent of Queen's final albums with Freddie Mercury when he knew he was near death, and had song titles like The Show Must Go On. While the Scorpions' career is no doubt winding down, in late 2012, Matthias Jabs satiated fans once again by saying the band would still remain together, and they were not ruling out the possibility of future tours or albums. Given the successes of the last 3 albums, one can only hope that the band has more to say. Over the course of nearly 50 years and 19 studio albums, the Scorpions have gone through different phases and sounds. In their early years, the Scorpions would prove incredibly influential, utilizing twin guitar harmonies and elements of prog rock similar to Wishbone Ash, Judas Priest, and Thin Lizzy. Each of these bands I just mentioned would go on to form a very important part of metal's early years. While many people are no doubt aware of the Scorpions' music, it can be easy to forget just how influential they were during the 70s and 80s. Their soaring vocals, intricate and inventive guitar work, arena rock anthems, power ballads, and quirky songs have seen the band go on to influence hundreds of other rock and metal musicians. Just a small example of artists influenced by the band include Iron Maiden, Stryper, Firewind, Queensryche, Yngwie, Fozzy, and many more. In fact, I highly recommend checking out Firewind's cover of Pictured Life, Fozzy's cover of Blackout, or Yngwie Malmsteen's cover of The Sails of Sharon. To end the show, let's look back at the band's entire career using songs that are fan favorites as well as my own. I'm going to exclude their biggest hits and won't be playing music from every album, just every era, in the hope that some of these songs will tempt Scorpions newbies to look beyond the hits and find out for themselves just what made the Scorpions so special to metal's early history. Takes my dinner, drinks my beer, spends my money, but I don't care. Take me on time. But I'm in a trance. Hey baby, tell me, can't you hear me calling? I'm in a trance. That's all for this episode, and now I'm back to writing what will become the next episode, which will deal with bands in general. Stay tuned.